Rehoboam, Solomon's son, introduced all sorts of sinful sexual practices as part of the worship of these fake and false gods that he introduced. Sadly, when he died and his son took the throne, the son followed very much in his footsteps. His name is Abijah, and verse 3 tells us, he committed all the sins his father had done before him. His heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his forefather had been. However, God made certain promises to David, you remember? And God always keeps his promises. God promised that David's descendants would remain upon the throne, and so, for the sake of his own faithfulness to that promise, God did not utterly destroy Abijah, but instead he raised up a son to succeed him who did love the Lord. This son is King Asa. It's wonderful to see that Asa did not simply say the right sort of spiritual sounding sentences. His life was in line with what he knew to be true. He did what is right in the eyes of the Lord, as David his father had done. David was not perfect, Asa was not perfect, but this is God's settled declaration about King Asa. He was like his great-great-grandfather, King David, not just like him biologically, but like him spiritually. He expelled the male shrine prostitutes from the land and got rid of all the idols his ancestors had made. Listen to this. He even deposed his grandmother, Maacah, from her position as Queen Mother because she had made a repulsive image for the worship of Asherah, which is a remarkable thing to do, isn't it? Sweet Granny Maacah, little old lady, surely she wouldn't hurt a fly. That's what we might think if we looked at her. But her heart is far from the Lord, and she even tries to ensnare others by making, we read, a repulsive image for the worship of this false god, Asherah. When Jesus says that we ought to love him more than father or mother, or indeed grandfather or grandmother, this is what it looks like. If faithfulness causes you to walk in a certain direction, and a family member calls you to walk in a different direction that conflict with your convictions, which way should you go? Which direction should you decide? You should reject the awful advice of that family member and walk in the path of righteousness. And that is what happened here. Such was Asa's love for God. Asa's heart was fully committed to the Lord all his life, we read. That is a good example to us of honoring God above all others. Now, the kings that follow in David's line, they all reign in the south, and some of them are good kings, and some of them are evil kings. We've seen some of that already, actually, haven't we? The kings who reign in the north, they do not all belong to the same family line. It is a real mess of kind of man-made rule and military conquests, people switching out and swapping the throne for whoever is the strongest at that moment. And every single king in the north is sinful and self-serving. And so, at the minute, it is the dynasty of Jeroboam up north, but it will not last for very long at all. Verse 25, Nadab, son of Jeroboam, became king of Israel in the second year of Asa, king of Judah. So just after Asa is crowned in the south, Jeroboam up north passes away, and his son Nadab takes the throne. By the way, what a strange name to give your son. Do you remember the story of Nadab and Abihu, who offered unauthorized fire and were killed for it? To have a newborn baby and say, "Ooh, I'd like to name him after one of the most famously wicked men in Israel's history," that's a strange choice to make, isn't it? It reveals either your ignorance about the history of Israel or your allegiance to that man's way of doing things. Baasha, son of Ahijah from the tribe of Issachar, plotted against him, and he struck him down at Gibbethon, a Philistine town, while Nadab and all Israel were besieging it. As soon as he began to reign, he killed Jeroboam's whole family. He did not leave Jeroboam anyone that breathed, but destroyed them all, according to the word of the Lord given through his servant Ahijah, the Shilonite. Do you remember in the previous chapter, we saw that only one of Jeroboam's descendants, that sick young son, would be given an honorable burial. All the rest of them would be struck down by their enemies and be given to the beasts of the field and the birds of the air. That is exactly what happens here in fulfillment of God's earlier prophecy. This man, Baasha, from a rival family, rises up and wipes out the entire family that belonged to Jeroboam's family line. So, it's a new king up north, but the same old crimes. The chapter ends by telling us that this new king, Baasha, did evil in the eyes of the Lord, following the ways of Jeroboam and committing the same sin Jeroboam had caused Israel to commit, that is, the sin of idolatry. Well, it's a pretty dark and desperate chapter, and the only glimmer of light is found in the life of King Asa down south. In fact, that is how the Bible describes him in verse 4. For David's sake, the Lord his God gave him a lamp in Jerusalem by raising up a son to succeed him and by making Jerusalem strong. It is in the spiritually dark times that the true light shines all the brighter. As Jesus said, "Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." Live such a life of God-honoring beauty that others have cause to turn their attention to the Lord that you love and the one that you live for, that they would be drawn to follow him for themselves and discover that those who once walked in spiritual darkness can see a great light, the Lord Jesus Christ.